Chapter 19. Blood Ties. Hermione woke to the sound of a chalk tapping against stone. Her eyes fluttered open, and at once she knew something was wrong, for this was not her dormitory. The ceiling arched too high, ribs of pale stone curving overhead like the inside of some great bleached beast. Tall windows lined the far wall, though no landscape showed beyond them, only a dull, pearlescent light, as if the world outside had been ground smooth and featureless. The air smelled faintly of minerals and smoke and resin. She was sitting upon a chair, but when she tried to push off it, ropes tightened around her wrists and ankles, silvery and seamless, pinning her in place. Panic surged instantly, hot and choking. "Ah," said a deep voice. "You're awake." Hermione's head snapped to the left. Master Thalberg stood near the blackboard, large hands folded behind his back, looking for all the world as though he had merely paused mid-lecture. His robes were in furry disarray, and his long hair fell to his shoulders. He smiled when he saw her looking, a mild, indulgent thing. "Please don't struggle," he added gently. "You'll only exhaust yourself. I wouldn't be worth my wand if the charms couldn't handle a bit of resistance." Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Where am I?" she demanded, hating the tremor in her voice. "Let me go." This is illegal. This is educational," supplied Thalberg smoothly. "At least that is my hope." Hermione swallowed. Her wand was gone. Puck was not gone, Hermione saw. The fat, misshapen black cat was curled up behind a desk leg, looking content. Although she knew it was irrational, for he was just an animal, she felt an overwhelming desire to wring his neck. "You kidnapped me," she said slowly. "Why, you can understand why I am a bit on edge, right, sir? Because this is not normal at all. You are not normal." Thalberg inclined his head, conceding the point as one might concede a minor correction. "Temporarily relocated you," he said. "Kidnapped is such an ugly word. It suggests selfishness, some sort of benefit for the captor. This," he gestured around the room, "is quite selfless. I certainly gain nothing from it. Only you do." He approached her desk, footsteps echoing softly. Up close, Hermione could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the careful calm of his expression. There was no anger there, not even a trace of cruelty, but that frightened her more than either would have. "You did very well today," he continued conversationally. "Extraordinarily well, in fact. I was pleased." Hermione's fingers curled uselessly against the bands. "The troll," she whispered. "That was you." Thalberg did not deny it. "A necessary stimulus," he said lightly. "Fear has a way of clarifying one's nature. You could have killed me, but I did not. What about Capel? He'd been the one telling me I need to follow the letters, the one forcing me. He was just your friend then." A smile graced Thalberg's full lips. "Ulrich is a funny man. I wouldn't know if we are friends, but I suppose that'd be a word for it. In all honesty, it didn't take much convincing. I do so much work on his behalf as is." He viewed his 2 talks with you as a better alternative than having to actually do his job. Hermione tried to discreetly wiggle her wrists out, but the silvery ropes coiled tighter. "Why? Why use him as your messenger? Have a flair for the dramatics, do you? Got me there." He chuckled and turned away, then picked up a piece of chalk and wrote a single word upon the board in a rough hand. "Alchemy, tell me," Thalberg said, tapping the word once. "What is it?" Hermione's mouth felt dry. Every instinct screamed at her to say nothing, to give him nothing, but as silence stretched, Hermione knew the only way out was to play along. "It's," she began, then forced herself to continue. "It's the study of transformation, of matter and essence. The categorization and refinement of substances through process and understanding." Thalberg hummed softly, as though considering a mildly interesting argument. "Taken straight from the textbook," he said at last. "Go on." "It seeks balance." Hermione pressed on, voice growing steadier as familiarity took hold, and equivalence, too. "It's all about the harmony between form and function, the spiritual and physical." He turned back to her, chalk dusting his fingers. "Very pretty," he said, his beady eyes studying her. "And entirely insufficient. That's but those are the definitions in the course books he wasn't. At once, Thalberg tutted, he began to pace now. Alchemy is not about change, he said. Change is trivial without purpose. Everything changes. Rot changes fruit. Fire changes wood. Life changes men. He stopped directly before her. Alchemy, he said softly, is about improvement. It is the art of taking what is flawed base and rendering it pure. A chill made its way through Hermione. She shivered. Pure, she echoed. That's objective. Who decides what's flawed? Thalberg smiled again, wider now, almost fond. You ask who decides, he said mildly. History does. Power does. Results do. Hermione's throat felt tight. That isn't an answer. It is the only answer that has ever mattered, he replied. He stopped beside the board again, and with deliberate strokes drew a crude circle. Within it, he marked flecks and lines, darkened in places and smudged in others. Impurity, he said, tapping the chalk against the shaded portions. Dross. Material that clouds, that weakens, that dilutes. His gaze flicked to her, and Hermione was paralyzed in fear. Impurities, she knew, were meant to be removed, and Hermione had quite the suspicion of what Thalberg labeled as such. Magic, he went on, is not evenly distributed by fate's whim. It is inherited, cultivated, refined through generations of discipline. It thrives in certain soils and withers in others for good reason. Hermione's fingers curled against the silvery bands. That's not true, she said, heat rising to her face. Magic isn't a crop to be bred. It isn't livestock, for God's sake. It's more than that. No, Thalberg's brows rose. And yet the oldest families, those who guard their lineages, produce the strongest manifestations with remarkable consistency. You'd be hard-pressed to find a Muggle-born metamorph magus, for one. You can't just attribute everything to blood. Hermione shot back, though her voice shook. Talent appears everywhere. And who cares about some irrelevant quirk? Why does a slightly higher possibility of having a really, really rare trait make purebloods better? It doesn't. The magic I can perform, I am twice as I am not so foolish, Thalberg interrupted gently, as to paint an entire people with a single brush. Oh, she said, her voice thin but sharp, just most of them. He turned fully toward her now, but Hermione did not want to meet his gaze. Instead, she settled for glaring at Puck, who was still curled upon the desk. The deformed cat had closed his bulging eyes, and from the way his ears flattened, he seemed to be drifting off to sleep. There are anomalies, he said, rare ore found in common ground. Every maxim has its exception, after all, you must understand. That is why you were admitted. It was with great will that Hermione did not flinch. She continued to stare at the cat, even as her breath hitched. She couldn't allow herself to show a reaction, no matter how hard she wanted to burst into tears right now. You didn't let me in to fail, she breathed. No, he agreed. I let you in top-roof. A flick of his wand, and Beniathelkemir began to write again. Calcination. You walked through the fire, he said quietly. You left comfort, certainty. You burned away what tethered you to mediocrity. Dissolution. The first letter, he continued. The duel you interfered in. I needed you to see what you would do when forced to choose between safety and magic. And you chose well. Her chest tightened, and tears began to blur her vision. She'd been right. God, he was a raving lunatic, and she was kidnapped by him. Idly, her mind drifted back to that awful boy, Ron Weasley, telling her all about Quirrell in Diagon Alley. Now, there was no doubt in Hermione's mind that magical schools ought to vet their staff more thoroughly. Separation. The nightmares, he said, almost kindly. The troll you cursed yourself with. You learned to identify weakness within yourself, and you cut it off. Fermentation. Your friend, Thalberg said softly. You allowed him to suffer to keep your place here. He had been your guide, your only constant, and you damned him. You chose your future over sentiment. Hermione flinched as though struck. He didn't damn him. You said it wasn't permanent, and losing my place here would be distillation. The refined specimen today that I speak to now, he finished. Excellent work with that nasty troll I sent after you, by the way. He stepped back, surveying the list with satisfaction. And now, he said, voice dropping, conjunction, "You're a mad," whispered Hermione. "You think this is some kind of purification ritual? You manipulated me. You hurt people. I tested you," Thalberg corrected, "and you passed. I didn't choose you," she burst out. "I chose magic." "That doesn't mean I believe what you believe. Belief," he said patiently, "is secondary to outcome. You have demonstrated that when pressed, truly pressed, you will prioritize power above all. I prioritized survival," she cried. "Survival is the purest instinct of all." He approached her again, looming now, though his expression remained calm. "Tell me," he said softly, "if magic is everything you say it is, beautiful, transcendent, sacred, should it not be guarded, refined, protected from dilution? It doesn't need protection from people like me," snapped Hermione. "It needs protection from people like you." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, amusement, perhaps. "So mouthy," he said quietly. "For one who is well aware, I know exactly what they are." Hermione's mind raced, and her heart thudded, and she knew he was right, but still, she lifted her chin. "You set a troll on me," she said. "You've watched me all year. You've constructed an elaborate kidnapping to interrogate me. So yes, sir, I imagine you already know exactly what I am." Hermione swallowed. Powerful. The word trembled as it came out, and Thalberg began to chuckle, shaking his head, as if she were an unruly dog or some such. Red clouded her vision, and Hermione felt nothing but anger. How dare he? "I am powerful," she continued, forcing steadiness. "You can argue about blood and soil and centuries of cultivation and all that tosh until you're a blue in the face. But this is my first full year practicing magic, and I am top of the third year. Mistress Mull says I've the best charmswork of my age she's seen in years. I've never touched dark magic before Durmstrang, and it took weeks for me to beat students who supposedly specialized in it. If that's what purity gets, dross doesn't seem so bad now, does it? So, sir, here's my offer. Let me go, and maybe, just maybe, when I have even more power, he won't just strike you down where you stand." For a moment there was no sound but a faint purr from Puck. The cat still curled into a fetal position upon the desk, and Hermione's own ragged breathing. Then Thalberg's expression altered. It did not harden, no. That would have been simpler, rather. It grew intent. The professor stepped toward her, and the air itself seemed to shift with him. He was a large man. She had always known that. But towering over her bound form, his shadow cutting across her knees, he appeared almost elemental, like some crag split from a mountainside and given hands. "You mistake me," he said quietly. His wand long, pale, and thin as a splinter of bone rose, and Hermione's stomach dropped. She had not thought shed, hoped, oh God, what could she do? She squeezed her eyes shut, but no curse came. Instead, the pressure around her wrists and ankles disappeared. She opened her eyes, looking down, only to see that those silver ropes had vanished. Hermione stared down at her white and trembling hands, slowly rubbing the red marks below. "Stand," instructed Thalberg. It was not shouted, but it did not need to be. She rose slowly, every muscle coiled as she did so. The classroom seemed larger now that she was upright, the ceiling pressing down like a vault. The windows still showed nothing but that blank, pearled void. "What do you want?" she demanded, though her voice was thinner than she would have liked. To conclude, from within his robes he drew something that caught the light. A knife, narrow and gleaming silver, its edge impossibly clean and its hilt stubby. Hermione did not think. She ran, and furiously at that. The door was only a dozen strides away, and as soon as she reached there, she seized the iron handle and wrenched it down. It did not budge. She pulled again, harder, but the wood did not so much as rattle. "Open," she cried, slamming her palm against it. "Open," her fist thudded uselessly. She pounded, breath hitching. "Help! Someone!" Behind her, Thalberg exhaled, a long, weary sound. "Miss Morgenstern," he said, and now there was a thread of irritation. "If I had intended you harm, you would not have woken at all. Must we indulge theatrics?" She whirled, back pressed to the door. He stood where she had left him, knife resting loosely at his side, looking for all the world as though she had tracked mud across his classroom floor. "You are being unreasonable," he added, almost plaintively. "Unreasonable. asked Hermione, her voice pitching up. Her laugh came out shrill and almost hysterical. You have a knife. A knife. Yes, he said patiently, and you have a mind. Let us try to use the latter. Something moved near the wall, and Hermione's eyes darted sideways. Puck, that wretched, traitorous creature, had leapt lightly upon a cabinet. With one lazy sweep of his paw, he hooked at a brass latch. The door creaked open, and inside, upon a shelf, was her wand. Hermione did not pause to question miracles, instead diving in that direction at once. Her fingers closed around the familiar wood just as Thalberg turned, and she spun too, her arm outstretched. Don't, she warned, though her hand shook violently. Don't come any closer. The wand tip quivered. She knew how absurd this was. He was an accomplished wizard. She was 13. There was no chance she could win unless he was caught off guard, which he was not. Thalberg's mouth tightened. I do not wish to kill you, he said, a bit sharply, for heaven's sake. Then dropped the knife. He considered her a moment. Then, with exaggerated care, he set the blade upon a desk. There, he said, satisfied. No, she snapped. I am not satisfied. I won't be until Yowell. I'd say explain, but I am having a really awful feeling that won't be good news either. He pinched the bridge of his nose as though warding off a headache. It is a ceremonial instrument, nothing more. I only require a drop of blood. Her stomach lurched. For what? A troth. She blinked once, then twice, then thrice. A troth. A blood vow, he clarified. It's a mutual binding. We shall swear not to betray one another. Hermione's eyes bulged. You've lost your mind. I assure you I have not. He clasped his hands behind his back once more, as though resuming a lecture. You will vow never to reveal my machinations, he went on. Not to staff, parents, nor friends. And neither will you work against me or my admissions process. In return, I shall vow never to reveal your secret. Her grip tightened on her wand, and she contemplated hexing him in the face. She knew it likely wouldn't even land, but perhaps just a try. You're blackmailing me. I am correcting an oversight, he replied. Many years ago, I failed to bind another student when I should have. And look at her now. Varric had been interfering as soon as she realized what Id made you do to Mr. Litvak's duel. It took holding her Muggle-born status above her head once more to stop her, but what if that hadn't been enough? I've been on edge for the past year. She tried sneaking poison into my mead, did you know? Awful woman. Hermione stared at him, a wild, disbelieving giggle bubbling up before she could stop it, some distant, rational part of her faintly amused and utterly astounded at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. And now you think you can just what? Slice my hand and make it tidy? I think, he said testily, that you are intelligent enough to see the benefit. But something inside her snapped, and Hermione only snarled, suppose I am not. Before her wand flicked, and the nearest desk shuddered, wood splintering and folding, reshaping midair. Legs fused and grain twisted as the surface bowed outward, and in less than a breath, a large, snarling hound landed between them, teeth bared. Get him, she shrieked. The hound lunged, magnificent and terrible. Its slavering jaws hung open, and triumph flared in Hermione's chest. But Thalberg gave a contemptuous wave of his wand, and at once the spotted dog turned, now racing back to her. For a moment Hermione was frozen, and all she could think of was that she needed Itaway Depulso. She cried now, and with a loud bang, the dog flew back and into the wall. Quickly, before it could leap up once more, she untransfigured it back into a desk, although now the wood was a bit splintered. Thalberg sighed. Come now, Miss Morgenstern, what is the purpose of stupefy? The jet of scarlet light tore through the space between them, bright and vicious, and was not there only a moment after, for Thalberg had parried it with great swiftness. The stunning spell cracked against the cabinet Puck had been resting upon, bursting it into a fountain of parchment and splinters as the fat black cat hurriedly jumped off. Expelliarmus, morsus, stupefy, ardia. Rattled off Hermione now, yet each except the last was blocked before they could even reach the man, sputtering out in sparks. At the burning hex, though, Thalberg let the jinx rebound. With a squeak, she dove out of the way, yet it still grazed her shoulder, and a white-hot lance of agony tore through her nerves as if her robes had been soaked in oil and set alight. The fabric hissed and smoldered, and the heat bit deep, leaving her arm trembling and half numb even as the smell of singed cloth stung her lungs. "Miss Morgenstern," said Thalberg mildly, tapping his wand, "what precisely do you hope to accomplish?" Gritting her teeth against the blaze crawling under her skin, Hermione forced herself upright. She scrambled to her feet, hair whipping wildly about her face, and slashed her wand. Ventus. A violent wave of wind exploded outward, shrieking across the stones, scattering dust and splinters in a spiraling gust as it hurtled toward Thalberg. "Disarm me," he continued, almost curious as he easily quelled the powerful gale. "Incapacitate me. Kill me. Ossifragus." "For as long as I live," he went on, stepping neatly out of the path, "I shall remember your secret. You understand that, surely?" "Shut up," she yelled. Expelliarmus, blocked yet again. Her wand jerked violently in her hand, and pain shot up her arm so fierce she nearly dropped it. "If I die," he mused, "then you are safe. Is that your intention, to murder me at 13? Hermione brought her wand down, but before she could complete her newest hex, Thalberg had already finished his own. Hermione let out a gasp as air snapped tight around her wrists. Invisible cords yanked her wand free, only for Thalberg to deftly catch it. Her breath came in ragged pulls. The burn along her shoulder throbbed in vicious pulses, each beat of her heart sending fresh fire under her skin. She reached instinctively for her wand again, though she knew it was gone. "Enough," Thalberg said, not loudly, but with a finality that made the words settle like stone. Puck, having re-established himself atop a relatively intact desk, began methodically licking a paw as though this were merely an especially untidy seminar. Hermione stood still, not knowing what to do. She had lost her wand and had no other weapon. There was no way out of this, not anymore. Althought, gleaming knife on the desk, drew her attention. "You prove my thesis for me," Thalberg continued, almost wearily. "If this is how the most brilliant of your kind behave, you needn't wonder why I am wary. You burned me," she spat. "More accurately, I simply repelled your own hex. And I wonder why I was casting that, being forced by a loon like you to do some ritual." He stepped closer. Her wand rested between his fingers, dwarfed by his hand. Thalberg regarded it thoughtfully. "Such a remarkable instrument," he murmured. "So responsive. It has grown with you already." "Give it back." In time, he moved to the desk where the silver knife lay waiting. The blade caught the cold light from the blank windows and flashed once. Hermione's pulse stuttered. "This is barbaric," she said, though her voice shook again despite her best efforts. "They're error rules. You know, I've read all about it. Binding magic of this sort requires consent," he supplied. Then he turned to her. "And you will give it?" "I will not," he sighed. "Miss Morgenstern," he said, with the strained patience of a parent addressing an obstinate child, "you are already at my mercy. I will always know your secret. Unless you plan on murdering me any time soon, does this truly change much for you?" He approached until she could see the faint scar that ran from his temple into his hairline, pale against weathered skin. "I require your word. Only that, and you will be set free." "Well, I don't trust you. Trust is irrelevant. Magic is not." He raised her wand slightly. "You know as well as I that blood binds deeper than parchment. Let us create a mutual troth. You will not reveal nor interfere with my admissions process, and of course, neither shall you ever harm me. In return, I swear never to speak of your origins." Disgust rolled through Hermione like bile, thick and choking. Her pale hands trembled, whether from fury or the lingering echo of his magic she did not know. The room felt too close and too airless, and the chalked wordle-chemy was all Hermione could focus upon. "You're revolting," she whispered. "A blood troth," he said, ignoring her words, "is paradox made flesh. Each must speak the other's binding. Each must wound and be wounded. Thus neither holds dominion. Except," said Hermione tightly, "you do." His mouth twitched faintly. "Only if you allow it." Then Thalberg gestured with the silver knife toward one of her pale hands. "Extend it, if you will." For a long moment, she did nothing but stare at the knife, Hermione's mind raced. She could snatch it, maybe, couldn't she? Perhaps he'd be in so much shock she could best him, could what, exactly? Escape and run to Varric for protection. Well, she could try. But his wand was already angled loosely in his other hand, and Hermione knew Thalberg was prepared for that. But slowly, trembling with fury, Hermione thrust her hand forward. "Very good," Thalberg murmured. He took her hand not roughly, not gently either, but with a sort of impersonal efficiency, and turned it palm upward. His fingers were cool, but the knife was even more so. The cut was swift, and pain bloomed bright and immediate. Her back arched despite herself as blood welled, bright and vivid. It slid along the crease of her palm, gathered at the heel of her hand, and fell in heavy drops to the stone floor. Thalberg did not flinch nor adopt any look of pity or sympathy. Rather, he watched the blood as he raised his wand, beginning to silently cast a spell she knew not. Silver, thread-like lines unspooled from the blood, glowing and racing up her arm as if a vine. "Repeat after me," he said softly, eyes fixed upon hers. "You will never reveal my machinations, nor interfere with my admissions process. You will never betray nor harm me." The threads quivered around her forearm, awaiting shape, but Hermione said nothing. She was paralyzed by uncertainty. Could she get out of this? Was there another way? She certainly couldn't think of one, and for once Hermione desperately wished she were cleverer. But as she wandered on and on, the silver threads climbed. They were not merely light now, they seared as they moved, cold and burning at once, tracing the veins beneath her skin. The cut in her palm, narrow as it had been, began to pulse. "Miss Morgenstern," said Thalberg quietly. She hesitated, and the wound split. It was not a simple reopening. Like ice under pressure, her skin parted with a wet, dreadful sound. Blood surged out in a hot rush, pouring over her wrist and loudly splattering against the stone. The silver threads brightened and thickened as they drank it in greedily, and Hermione gasped, her knees buckling. Pain white-hot and nearly obliterating was shooting up her arm in continuous waves. "Speak," Thalberg rumbled, and for the first time there was strain in his voice. The magic demands symmetry. Hermione's vision blurred. The room seemed to tilt. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, frantic and weakening. Through gritted teeth, half choking on it, she forced the words out. "I will never reveal your machinations," she gasped, "nor interfere with your admissions process. I will never betray nor harm you." The silver light flared. At once, the torrent slowed, though the wound still bled freely, a steady crimson stream. Thalberg inclined his head. "Good." Then he reversed the knife in his hand and offered it to her. For a fraction of a second, she stared at it, uncomprehending. Then she understood. Each must wound and be wounded. She took it. Her fingers were slick, the hilt nearly slipped. Thalberg extended his broad forearm without hesitation, rolling back his sleeve, revealing sun-weathered skin, corded muscle, and a scattering of old scars. He held his wand loosely in his other hand, still murmuring under his breath. The silver light hovered between them now, weaving as it waited, and Hermione did not hesitate. She cut, feeling some satisfaction as the blade bit deeper than he had expected, slicing across his forearm in a long, bright line. The silver threads leapt eagerly to him, racing up his arm in mirrored patterns. Thalberg's jaw tightened, but he did not recoil. He opened his mouth then to say, "Now, repeat after me." Hermione cut in, voice shaking but loud. "You will never reveal my Muggle-born status, nor my true lineage. Not to staff, not to ministry, not to anyone." The silver threads twisted upon themselves, tightening into a luminous helix that bound both their bleeding hands. Thalberg's mouth pressed into a thin, unreadable line, yet after the briefest hesitation he inclined his head and repeated her words without alteration, his voice steady even as the glow crawled higher along his arm. Still, Hermione did not lower the knife. The silver light wove between them, expectant and unfinished, and before Thalberg could resume his wandwork, she drove the blade into his open palm. His breath caught, and blood ran down the broad plane of his wrist, and the hovering threads convulsed violently, flaring brighter as they leapt to the fresh wound. "You will also," Hermione said, and though her voice trembled it rang through the chamber with unmistakable force, "never harm anyone for being Muggle-born. Not through this admissions process of yours. Not even through Durmstrang's official one. Not through tests, nor intimidation, nor blackmail. Blood status will not matter in admissions no matter what Durmstrang policy decrees." Thalberg stared at her, and for the first time since she had known him, the carefully arranged composure fell from his features. Astonishment flickered across his weathered face. "Miss Morgenstern," he began, whether in protest or warning it was impossible to tell. She pressed the blade harder, widening the gash. "You will end it," she said through clenched teeth, "with me." His wound tore further under the strain, the skin parting as if forced by invisible hands. Silver light shot up his arm like forked lightning, cracking and writhing across muscle and vein. For several dreadful seconds he did not speak. His sleeve darkened, soaked through, and the stone floor gleamed slick beneath them with their mixed blood. Hermione swayed, and after a few seconds her own cut split wide. Like with Thalberg's, it was as though a seam had been forced apart from within. Blood surged forth in horrifying quantity, the neat incision becoming a ragged tear, and pain crashing over her in blinding waves that stole the air from her lungs. Her fingers tingled, then numbed. Her arm felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. The vow she had spoken earlier burned within her like molten wire. "You will never betray nor harm me." She had harmed him, and if he did not retroactively consent, Hermione knew blood would continue to rush out. And yet she smiled, a small, pained thing. "History power, results they don't decide," she rasped. "I do." Thalberg's face had gone ashen beneath the ruddy cast of his skin. The broad set of his shoulders trembled once, not from fear, but from the undeniable fact of what the magic was exacting. For all his size and strength he looked, in that moment, terribly small. "I swear," he said hoarsely, each word forced through clenched teeth, "never to harm or persecute any student for being Muggle-born. I will end the scrutiny of blood within my admissions." The magic seized upon the declaration at once, silver light fusing into a single spiral that bound them for one breathless instant in blinding radiance. Then it faded. The bleeding slowed not entirely, but enough to spare them from collapse. The cords coiled inward, tightening and condensing until they formed two compact, brilliant knots of light. A soft metallic chime rang through the chamber as the glow solidified and separated. Two pendants drifted downward and settled into their respective palms, each wrought of fine silver and coiled delicately around a tiny teardrop-shaped vial of glass. Within each vial, twin threads of blood twined endlessly around one another. Through swimming vision, Hermione stared at the pendant. Her palm had sealed, not cleanly but sufficiently, the skin fused into a thin, angry line that throbbed still. Across from her, Thalberg's wounds likewise drew together, leaving raw, livid scars that would not soon fade. For a long moment neither spoke. The room felt cavernous and hushed, as though the very stones had borne witness and were vowed to silence too. Puck trotted over, only to lap at the pool of blood. At last Hermione closed her fingers around the warm pendant. She swayed where she stood, the edges of her vision darkening, and forced her feet to move. When she reached the door and grasped the handle, it yielded at once. Cold air flooded in, and without sparing Master Thalberg another glance, Hermione stepped into it, clutching the silver vial at her throat as she hurried away. The pendant thudded lightly against her sternum with every step, its warmth horribly comforting. She walked as though pursued, though no one followed, and when at last she turned a corner and found herself alone in a narrow stretch of corridor, she stopped. The tears came without warning, great, wrenching sobs that tore up from somewhere deep and ragged inside her. She pressed the heel of her uninjured hand to her mouth to stifle the sound, but it broke free anyway, echoing faintly along the walls. Fury had sustained her thus far. Stripped of it, she felt 13 and exhausted and terribly, terribly violated. The silver vial gleamed faintly where it lay against her collarbone, and she let out a strangled, furious sound at the sight of it. "I decide," she whispered again, though it sounded smaller now. By the time she reached the dormitory, her eyes were swollen and her limbs trembled with delayed weakness. She shoved the door open harder than necessary and stumbled inside. At once, she tore the pendant from around her neck and threw it upon the desk. For a moment, she only stared at it, chest heaving. The tiny glass vial caught the candlelight. Within, the twin threads of blood twisted serenely around one another, endless and serene, and another sound rose in her throat, half laugh, half sob, and before Hermione knew it, Shed seized the nearest object at hand, a thick volume off-weaving ruminants, an esoteric compendium of goatifying textiles, and hurled it down upon the pendant with a cry. The book struck with a solid thud and bounced aside, the vial uncracked and unmarred. "No," she said hoarsely. She grabbed another, a study of Weber's Law, and flung it with all her strength. Then another and another. Books thudded and scattered across the floor in disarray, ink bottles toppled and crashed, while parchment fluttered down like startled birds. And yet the pendant only rolled once and came to rest an inch away. "Finite," she shouted, jabbing her wand toward it. "Lacero, Defodio." Her hands were shaking so badly that the last missed, and her desk now bore a bowling ball-sized hole in its center. Still, the pendant did not so much as tremble. The threads within the vial continued their slow, intimate dance. A small, strangled noise escaped her, and she swept an entire stack of books from the desk with one furious motion. They crashed to the floor in a violent avalanche of parchment and leather. Hermione stood there a while longer, wand hanging uselessly at her side. At last her strength had deserted her entirely. She sank down amid the wreckage, back against the bed frame, and drew her knees up to her chest. Time passed, but she did not know how much. Then the door shook under a barrage of furious knocking. "Hermione." A voice called from the corridor, bright and breathless. "Hermione, open up." She did not move, too tired to do so. Still, she hid the pendant under her bedsheets. The knocking came again, louder, accompanied by the rattle of the handle. "I know you're in there." "You're not in the library, I am pretty sure, and I know you're feeling bad over doing so terribly on the dark arts exam. But this isn't about that." Alohomora. The door burst open, and Astrid swept inside, her cheeks flushed and braid half undone. She looked incandescently pleased with herself, eyes shining. "He's healed," she exclaimed, the words tumbling over one another. "Emil's all healed, they fixed it. He's walking, and there's no—" She stopped, her gaze falling upon the horribly messy room, books strewn everywhere, and the desk now bearing a gouge. Then it found Hermione, curled small and bloodless against the bed. Astrid's expression faltered, confusion cutting through her excitement, but her joy would not quite be subdued. "He's all right," she repeated, softer and slower now. "Hermione, Emil's all right." Chapter 20. Taking the Rainbow. The doors of the infirmary flew open with such force that they rebounded against the stone and clapped shut again like startled hands. Hermione did not notice, too focused on running. It was a heedless sprint, red robes snapping behind her all the while. She very nearly collided with a sniffly third year clutching a vial of pepper-up potion, and did not so much as apologize. Behind her, Astrid's pants echoed faintly far down the corridor. Hermione slowed down for God's sake, sake. But Hermione just burst through the final set of double doors and into the infirmary, proper a long, low-ceilinged chamber washed in golden summer light from lofty windows. The air smelled of dittany and something faintly metallic, and white-curtained beds stood in orderly rows, and they're near the third window from the endemol. He was standing, not pale and still and dreadful beneath blankets, but standing. He looked as if he'd grown a bit, had one hand braced on the end of the bed, and the other gesturing animatedly as he spoke. Opposite him lounged two taller, fair-haired figures, his brothers Artemius and Alexander. "That's pure and utter stupidity, Emil," Alexander was declaring. "Every old man was once an infant. Every slag was once a virgin." Change happens. Emma dissolved a first year's teeth and made him choke on it. Emil shot back, laughing. And you seriously want to go out with her? Has she ever even apologized to that poor boy? Alexander scratched the back of his neck. Well, I'd ask her, but well, the problem is she gets a little angry sometimes. Stop making him feel bad, Emil, sighed Artemius. In the end, she's hot, and isn't that what really matters? At Alexander's sage nod, the three brothers laughed. Then, as Hermione hurriedly walked over, Emil glanced up, smile still half-formed. Oh, he said brightly. Hermione, Astrid told you then. It's really a miracle Frisk didn't even. Hermione burst into tears. Hermione, asked Emil, bewildered. I thought this was good news. Hermione crossed the distance between them so quickly Emil did not even have time to brace for the impact. Before he knew it, Hermione's arms were practically crushing him. You idiot, she cried, tears flowing down. Of course it's good. Oh, it's just I mean it's better than good. It's amazing, doubly wonderful. Emil blinked rapidly as Hermione clutched him tighter, wailing now. Slowly his hand came up and gave her an awkward pat. There it's, yeah, pretty good. I mean, I like it more than being in bed. Although, there was a certain charm in being constantly catered to. Moments later, Astrid entered at a far more dignified pace. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said. Hermione, you run like you're being chased by. She stopped, raising her eyebrows at the sight. Alexander, for his part, let out a low whistle. If this is what a stay in the infirmary earns you, little bro, I may reconsider my life choices. Please don't, said Artemius, wrinkling his nose. But it could soften up Emma. Through the sound of her own howls, Hermione heard a slight considering sound from Artemius. She did not care, though, still too busy ruining Emil's robes with her tears. Her shoulder throbbed where her unhealed burn lay hidden beneath fabric, and her palms stung faintly, but none of it mattered. Only Emil did. Practical exams were upon them not even a few days later. It was a trying time, especially for the older years, and despite the never-lowering sun, practically no student could afford going outside. It was, therefore, nothing short of miraculous that Hermione Granger, she who had once made color-coded blocks for bathroom breaks, was presently sitting cross-legged upon a flat, sun-warmed stone at the edge of the great black lake, her shoes abandoned somewhere in the grass, and her toes trailing idly through the glittering shallows. Emil lay stretched out beside her, hands folded behind his head, expression one of profound contentment. He had rolled up his sleeves. The last pallor of infirmary life had been replaced by a healthy glow, and his dark hair, forever slightly too long, caught the light. I had forgotten, said Emil, grinning, that the outdoors existed. Hermione tilted her face toward the sun, eyes closed. It does, she agreed, and it's vastly underappreciated by the both of us, even before you got in the infirmary. What were we doing, forcing ourselves to stay cooped up in the library all this time? We, asked Emil dubiously. Are you speaking French or something? Because it was you forcing us to do all that, if I remember correctly. Hermione opened one eye and regarded him with lofty offense. Well, I'm trying to relax now. Of course, not too long. The charms exam is still tomorrow. Ah, said Emil, folding his hands more comfortably behind his head. Even when you try to be laid back, the exam topic always comes up. I think I'm developing a bit of trauma related to that word, even. She made a small, scoffing sound and began scanning the shoreline with scholarly intensity. After a moment, she selected a flat, oval pebble, turning it between her fingers. Ooh, this is a good one, isn't it? At Emil's blank look, she went on, haven't you ever skipped one? Does throwing them at my brothers count? Hermione's lips twitched. Only if they bounced at least twice. Emil huffed a laugh and propped himself up on his elbows. I have, in fact, led a tragically deprived life. You may demonstrate. Hermione rose in a single fluid motion and stepped closer to the water's edge, robes brushing her calves. It's all in the angle, she said, as though beginning a lecture. And the wrist. You want it flat like this. She bent slightly, drew her arm back, and with a swift flick sent the stone skimming low across the surface. It bounced once, twice, thrice, then 4, then 5 times, before finally surrendering and slipping beneath the dark water. Emil sat up fully now, impressed despite himself. "Ha! That wasn't too bad." "Well, it certainly wasn't my best," said Hermione, a tad defensively. "I hoped so," he said with joking haughtiness, pushing himself to his feet. "Now stand aside. Let a professional demonstrate how not to do it." He stood, brushing grass from his robes, and selected a stone at random, a lumpy, stubborn-looking specimen. His brow furrowed in exaggerated concentration, and then he threw it. The stone struck the lake with a pitiful plop and vanished instantly. After a moment of staring at the expanding ripple, Hermione dissolved into helpless giggles. "That," she managed between breaths, "was vertical. And you picked the worst stone possible. It's not flat or smooth at all." "Well, how was I supposed to know the rules?" Emil grumbled, his cheeks pinkening. He tried again. This time the stone managed a single heroic hop before sinking. Looking at her hopefully, he said, "That's an improvement, right?" "Right, marginal," she allowed, stepping behind him. "Here your elbows too high." Before he could protest, she reached out and adjusted his arm. She repositioned his grip, nudged his shoulder down, and guided his wrist into a flatter angle. He stood very still through it all, eyes fixed determinedly on the horizon. "On 3, she said briskly. 1, 2, he released it early. The stone skittered once, twice, thrice, then 4 times in quick succession before sinking. At once they both froze. Emil blinked. "Did you see?" "Yes," Hermione exclaimed, clapping once in delighted triumph. "You've really got the hang of it, I think." Emil drew himself up at once, puffing out his chest so abruptly one might have thought he'd swallowed a bludger. "Of course I have," he said grandly. "Natural talent, raw, untamed genius. I was merely lulling you into a false sense of superiority." Hermione folded her arms, though her smile betrayed her. "You required my step-by-step instruction." "A minor technicality." He waved this away. "Every champion has a coach. I, however, have already surpassed mine. You most certainly have not." He stooped, this time with theatrical deliberation, selecting a stone of impeccable flatness. He weighed it in his palm, narrowed his eyes at the lake as though calculating wind resistance, gravitational pull, and at least 2 other factors. "For glory," he said, and then he threw. The pebble skimmed once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hermione gasped 7 times before disappearing. There was a stunned silence before Emil slowly turned to her, attempting and failing to suppress a victorious grin. "I believe," he said with immense dignity, "that makes me the undisputed champion of the Great Black Lake." "You are insufferable," Hermione informed him, though she was laughing outright now. He bowed extravagantly. "Please hold your applause. Autographs will be distributed after supper." Hermione rolled her eyes, and before he could react, she flicked her foot through the shallows, sending a perfectly aimed splash up the front of his robes. He stared down at the spreading damp patch in horror. "Hermione," he squeaked before he cleared his throat. "You could have chosen a different place. Now it looks like I've wet myself." Emil gained a gleam in his eyes then, and retaliated at once by scooping water with both hands and flinging it toward her. She shrieked and leapt back, but not quickly enough. Droplets caught in her already frizzy hair and darkened the sleeve of her uniform. For a moment they simply stood there, dripping and breathless, trying and failing to look stern. Then Hermione dissolved into giggles again, and Emil, champion of absolutely nothing at all, joined her. Eventually, after quite a few more rounds of stone skipping and ensuing splash wars, soaked hems and all, they surrendered to the inevitable. They retrieved their abandoned shoes, gathered their notes from the grass, and made their way back toward the fortress, still arguing over technical definitions of champion. They returned to their studying far later than either had planned, but as they settled side by side at a library table, shoulders brushing, neither of them regretted it in the slightest. And that held true, even the next day when the charm's practical finally rolled around. When asked to perform a simple summoning charm, it appeared before her with such immediacy Mistress Marle had almost thought she'd done a switching spell. Her slowing charm hushed the entire classroom into syrupy stillness before releasing it again, and with a single ventus, positively every object in the class was swept into a rather complex airshow. The ritual's practical went just as smoothly, and Vogel had nodded in approval at her flawless performance of the garden's whisper, flowers blooming in each crack of stone. It was not until natural magic that Hermione truly faltered. Thalberg's presence was a splinter beneath her skin, and she could not look at him without having the urge to attack him, which also, conversely, led to a shock of pain radiating from her hand each time she even thought of it. Still, discipline won. She breathed, crushed the Valyrian precisely, stirred counterclockwise at the exact degree required, and let her simmering, calming draft settle into a flawless, pearlescent calm. Soon after, the dueling examination arrived. Unlike the other exams, it lasted for days, having been set up as a bracket where each student went through about 5 rounds. Hermione, of course, cleared it with ease until it was the final round, and her opponent Conrad. He had been too quick, and despite Hermione's skill with magic, he still proved the superior duelist, winning by the skin of his teeth. "I would be very interested," he had panted, giving Hermione her wand handle first, "in sparring again." For once, the boy did not seem to be quietly gloating, and so Hermione said, "I suppose I might be able to make time next year." His mouth had curved properly then. "I look forward to it." Afterwards, there was scarcely time to breathe. "Transfiguration," Emil muttered darkly, as a bell clanged somewhere deep within the fortress. "Of course it's today." The third years, many already wrung out by dueling, hurried along the corridors in a tight, anxious cluster. Robes flapped, parchment was hastily stuffed into satchels, and more than one student attempted to revise switching theory while jogging down a flight of stairs. Professor Capel was waiting for them outside his classroom, tall and severe as a spear planted before a gate. His pale eyes swept over the lot of them with habitual disapproval. "You will enter one at a time," he said coolly. "You will perform the assigned transformation. You will leave. I advise you not to waste my afternoon." There was no further instruction nor encouragement before the first name, Maria Antonova, was barked out. The door shut, and the corridor fell into a silence broken only by the faint ticking of something within the room and the occasional, muffled noise of a transfigured creature. One by one, students were called and then emerged, some flushed with triumph and others looking as though they had swallowed their own tongues. Hermione stood very straight against the wall, thinking of nothing but Capel. She hated him. Not with the hot, unfocused anger she felt for Thalberg, but with something colder, for Capel had known, had watched, and had aided in that blackmail only because Thalberg was his friend. For months, Transfiguration had been a battlefield of its own. Her magic had faltered not for lack of knowledge, but because her mind had been a storm of fear and loathing whenever she lifted her wand before him. Hermione Morgenstern. Quickly, Hermione stepped inside. The classroom was austere as ever. One desk stood at the center, and upon it rested a plain brass clock, its steady ticking echoing in the high rafters. Capel stood beside it, hands clasped behind his back. "Transform it," he said. Before, she would have calculated every potential factor, would have overthought every step until doubt crept in through the cracks. But she had faced a mountain troll, faced Thalberg, transfiguring under duress with no time to theorize either times, only to act. And it had worked, hadn't it? Hermione inhaled. The ticking seemed suddenly very loud. "Don't think," she told herself, "just do." She flicked her wand, and where the clock had stood, brass gleaming dutifully in the light, there now crouched a great grey wolf. It thumped upon the desk, lips curling back to reveal a set of gleaming teeth, a low snarl rumbling in its chest. Its yellow eyes flashed, entirely alive. Capel did not step back, but his gaze sharpened with an interest she'd never seen from him. After only a few moments, Hermione gave the faintest turn of her wrist, and the creature dissolved soundlessly back into brass and ticking hands. You may go, said Capel, although Hermione could swear his lips twitched. When she'd inclined her head and was only a moment from reaching the door, he added, and good work. With the strain of exams lifted at last, the fortress seemed to exhale. Students drifted from classrooms in loose clusters rather than rigid lines, and uniforms were not required anymore, many having ditched the red academic robes for more fashionable or comfortable alternatives. Laughter now echoed more freely in the stone corridors, and the great lake glittered invitingly beyond the battlements, as though it, too, had been waiting for term to end. Hermione found that, without the press of revision and looming assessment, time felt oddly spacious. Afternoons stretched lazily. Conversations could last hours. There was an air of suspended consequence, as though nothing dreadful could possibly happen before departure day, which, oddly enough, made her even more on edge. The morning of the leaving feast, Lars had extended an invitation to Astrid and Hermione to sit at the fourth-year table for breakfast. For the exams, he said, grinning down at both of them. I'm sure you need all the rest you can get, Astrid. And of course, there's nothing more relaxing than being with me. As for you, Hermione, well, heard you got second place in the dueling practical. Just know I'm always a shoulder to cry on. He snickered at her eye twitch. Owa, Astrid cooed, leaning forth to clutch onto Lars' aforementioned shoulder. You're so kind, Larling, offering that big, broad shoulder to just about anyone. But it's mine, you realize, right? Emil let out a loud cough. When everyone stared at him, he blushed. Sorry, something got in my throat. Must be a side effect of the curse or something. Astrid giggled. Oh, you want to come along, don't you? She turned to Lars eagerly. Can he? He can, right? You better say yes. Lars regarded Emil with a faintly amused expression. I suppose, he drawled at last, that we can make room. I do pride myself on generosity. How noble, muttered Emil. Thus it was that Hermione found herself at the fourth-year table, seated upon a polished bench among older students, most of whom she'd never had a single conversation with. Lars presided at one end, and Astrid had claimed a place beside him at once, Hermione taking the seat opposite, and Emil, after a fractional pause, settling neatly at her side. So, Astrid began animatedly, waving her fork for emphasis. Liv and Sophia have decided that I am, apparently, the mean girl in the situation. Can you believe it, you aeronaut? Lars said at once, leaning forward with gratifying loyalty. No way, said Emil eagerly, before taking a small spoonful from his small jar of a red, syrupy fruit preserve Varani Hermione thought was the name with his tea. Hermione wisely did not answer, busying herself with pouring herself her own tea. After examinations, for some odd reason, the food had vastly improved and the selections offered had increased. She paused before copying Emil, pouring a bit of Varani for herself before downing some more tea, her eyes widening as she realized she liked it. But that's the thing, Astrid was saying fiercely. Everybody knows Dimitri. Hermione, you know Dimitri, don't you? Which one? Asked Hermione, swallowing her tea down. The really cute one. Astrid, that's so subjective, and, well, yes, fine, I know who you're talking about. Astrid banged the table, beaming. See, even Hermione knows who I'm talking about. Lars raised his eyebrows. Careful. I might get jealous. At once, Astrid gave a delighted little squeal and promptly seized Lars by the collar of his uniform. Oh, don't you start, she laughed, pressing an exaggerated kiss to the tip of his nose. You know you're my favorite. Before she could react, Lars caught her round the waist and returned the gesture with infuriating calm. I do. It was all so unabashedly sweet that several fourth years nearby groaned in theatrical disgust, and Hermione and Emil exchanged a look. In front of my tea, whispered Emil, wrinkling his nose. Seriously. I'm waiting for the day he cheats. Hermione pursed her lips, but before she could whisper a response, Astrid went on. So anyway, she said, twirling a strand of pale hair around her finger, Dimitri comes up to me after charms looking absolutely tragic. You know, the face like an incubus knocked up a really, really depressed girl. My face better be like an incubus knocked up a Vila, Lars said with exaggerated jealousy. Oh, it's better, Astrid giggled, sighing dreamily. But anyway, he says, Astrid, I have a bullying problem. And you know me, I was obviously very supportive. I said, Dimitri, darling, whatever it is, we'll fix it. Too much rage. There are potions for that. Feeling volatile, cheering charms exist. I sometimes feel the urge to pummel losers too, but we manage it, don't we? Emil choked faintly on his tea, and Hermione closed her eyes for half a second, her lips reluctantly twitching. What are you two laughing about? Astrid demanded, despite laughing herself. How was I supposed to know that he was the bullying victim? The guy's like 6 feet tall and looks like he could bench press a carriage. Who is bullying him? No, I'll be real here, he really made me mad, because what the hell? Do you expect me to confront whatever monster must be coming after you or something? I don't get it. Hermione's cup paused before reaching her lips. Astrid, she chided, you can't make fun of him. And anyway, maybe it's rumors and such. You can't know until you ask. Astrid snorted. Rumors aren't bullying. If that were the case, I've bullied like half of this school. Astrid. What? Asked Astrid, blinking. I'm just being honest. She has a point, Emil said fairly, before wilting under Hermione's glare. Welly mean, come onmetry doesn't exactly fit the profile. Exactly. Astrid agreed, beaming. Anyway, I was very kind, though, after. I told him just to steal his bully's girlfriends or something, you know. But then, guess what? It turned out not to even be real, it was a girl. So then, I was even happier, of course, because I was like, Dimitri, you idiot. She obviously just fancies you, and violence is her love language. All you have to do is be firm with her and return it thricefold, and she'll probably. A shadow fell neatly across the table, long and angular, cutting through the easy morning light. Astrid fell silent at once, and Hermione turned slowly to see Mistress Varric. The woman wore robes of a deep, lustrous plum, and her dark hair had been swept into an intricate updo. Good morning, she said pleasantly, causing the fourth year to straighten as one. Her gaze skimmed across the table, pausing inevitably on Hermione. Miss Morgenstern, might I borrow you for a moment? I promise to return you before you know it. Hermione rose at once, heart giving a small, traitorous thud. Of course, Professor. As they walked from the great hall, Varric did not speak. The corridors were bright with late morning light, students lounging in alcoves and along window ledges. But Hermione's palms grew faintly clammy as they ascended one staircase, then another, until they reached Varric's office, a room Hermione had only entered once before. It was softly lit, with a roaring fireplace and shelves lined with titles of all sorts. Sit, Varric said, gesturing to the velvet chair opposite her desk. Hermione obeyed. Varric settled behind the desk with unhurried grace, folding her hands. I understand, she said quietly, that something rather dramatic occurred recently. Why do you think that? Because, Varric began, looking at Hermione quite intently, the esteemed Master Thalberg has asked for a sabbatical. Says he must do a bit of alchemical work that can't be accomplished at Durmstrang. At that, Hermione's heart soared. He would be gone, temporarily, that is. Still, for a moment, she considered denial, evasion, or some carefully curated half-truth. But Varric's gaze was not predatory, and Hermione knew that the Dark Witch held no ill will, even if she hadn't been willing to risk her employment for Hermione. And so Hermione told her. Not every trembling thought, not the precise horror of waking beneath a vaulted ceiling, but the gist of it, the summons, the talk of alchemy and impurity, the blade, the vow, the blood, and the remaining pendants. Her voice wavered only once, when she described the implication beneath Thalberg's words. Varric did not interrupt, gasp, or exclaim, merely listening all the while. When Hermione finished, Varric leaned back slightly in her chair, regarding her with an expression that was neither shock nor pity. Fascinating, she said at last. He did not go through those steps with me, nor the vowy wonder. Varric gained an odd sort of look in her eye. This pendant, it contained both of your bloods, yes. Yes, Professor. So he has access to your blood after this strange alchemy he made you perform, to the very essence of the one he transformed, the one he is tied to. Hermione's throat felt dry, but she still said, "Yes, Professor." Is that I hope it doesn't mean anything too bad, right? It's just a bit of blood. After a slight pause, Varric gave a small, almost dismissive wave of her hand. Yes, yes, just a bit of blood does not herald the apocalypse. Wizards have bled for far worse things than pendants and survived to boast about it. She rose and came round the desk then. You have been through something unusual, Miss Morgenstern, she said, not unkindly. Kidnapped by a master of alchemy, coerced into a binding vow, bled upon a ritual construct, and yet you sit before me as composed as ever. Hermione bit her lip. She was not quite sure she was particularly composed. Unscathed, Varric corrected herself with a faint smile. Or near enough. When I was your age, I assure you, I was far more out of sorts after considerably less provocation. There is strength in you, and not merely the sort that breaks things, but the sort that endures. A warmth, small and reluctant, stirred in Hermione's chest, and she smiled at the professor. She had not known Varric had it within her to say such kind things. There was a pause, and then, "Well," Varric said briskly, returning to her desk, "if you need anything, or if there is something you wish to ask, you may do so any time, just remember." Automatically, Hermione nodded, not actually planning on ever doing so, but then there was something, wasn't there? Aye, she hesitated, fingers tightening slightly in her lap. I've read about legilimency. Varric's brows lifted a fraction. I found mentions, Hermione continued quickly, in books about mind-related magic, but very little practical explanation, or heaven forbid, actual theory. Of course, it seems like awful magic it pries into minds and extracts information, and it doesn't sound very nice at all. Still, I couldn't help but start wondering, is there a way to protect oneself from it? For a witch your age, said Varric, her smile deepening. The shield charm you will learn next year is your most reliable defense. How about a witch who isn't my age? Hermione pressed on. For someone more advanced, or someone who has important secrets to keep. That, Varric said mildly, is considerably more advanced. She regarded Hermione shrewdly. I would tell you, but I'd have a feeling you'd attempt it, and that wouldn't be a good thing, Miss Granger. That sort of magic is not curriculum for third years, for it is not the sort of magic one learns. Such magic ages wizards. Hermione inclined her head, although that meant nothing. She would learn it anyway. And the pendant, she asked now hopefully, is there a way to destroy it? Binding magic is not my area of expertise. It is stubborn. Once forged, it resists interference. Varric tapped a finger lightly against her desk. If I were to wager, I would say this. Such magic is most easily undone by those who created it. External force tends to meet with unpleasant resistance. What if only one of the parties wished to break it? Asked Hermione quietly. I do not know. Perhaps the vow would take that as an insult and start extracting more blood. Or perhaps if you used truly destructive magic, but magic that dark is not meant for girls your age. Hermione smiled, nodding along. So there's a chance, she thought. At that, Varric inclined her head in dismissal. You may go, and Miss Granger. Yes, Professor. Do try to at least pretend you'll heed any of my warnings. Despite herself, Hermione huffed a soft breath of laughter as she left the office. When she re-entered the great hall, the noise struck her at once. A thunder of wings filled the vaulted space as a flood of owls poured in through the high windows, each bearing the morning's post. Feathers drifted like errant snowflakes. Students ducked and waved as parcels and newspapers were dropped upon tables with dull thumps. One particularly fat barn owl swooped low over the fourth-year table and released a tightly rolled newspaper directly into Lars's waiting hands. He had the reflexes of someone accustomed to snatching things midair. Finally, he muttered, flattening it against the table. Hopefully something interesting has happened for once. His eyes widened as he read on, and Astrid leaned across him at once, her braid slipping over her shoulder. Move your elbow, you great ox, Hermione slid into her seat just as Lars nearly choked on his lingonberry juice, and Astrid gasped. "What?" she asked at once, and Emil leaned forward, curious too, although he could not understand the words in the Norwegian newspaper. "What happened, Britain?" Astrid breathed, a hand over her bosom. "It's just awful. A first-year Hogwarts girl deed. It must have been a continuation of the Muggle-born attacks that'd been happening earlier, but I didn't think that. It was as if Hermione had been punched." Air left her, and words did too as she stared at Astrid. "What? No, that can't be. It's the safest school in Europe." "Well," said Lars slowly, "I guess it doesn't hold that title anymore. Maybe Beauxbatons or Coldovets does now. In fact," he scanned it once more, "I don't think it holds any title." The school's been closed. Hermione's mouth hung open, and Astrid had a similarly horrified look. Only Emil, who was halfway through buttering a slice of dark bread, did not look perturbed at all the morning of the last day. Trunks lay open like yawning mouths across the floor of Hermione and Iva's shared dormitory as both girls packed in near total silence. Iva had very little to pack, although she did have a small collection of novels and perfumes. Hermione, on the other hand, sat next to a frankly ridiculous tower of books, most of which had been copied with the Geminio charm, courtesy of Artemius, Emil's older brother, and neatly shrunken to the size of matchboxes, yet still almost reached Hermione's head. Hermione scooped up a dozen at once and poured them into her satchel. After all, she reasoned, she had not possessed nearly so many resources when she had been forced to teach herself first and second-year material. This was simpler supplementing, deepening her understanding of magic she already knew, or more truthfully, she simply adored reading. Iva paused, watching the steady stream of miniature books vanish into Hermione's bag. "Planning to found your own library?" she asked flatly. "One never knows," Hermione replied, equally brisk. Within minutes, her trunk was packed. Only one corner of the room remained untouched. Puck's corner, with his small transfigured cushion, enchanted scratching post, little silver dish still. Hermione did not touch it. They had been told to leave behind whatever they did not plan on taking, and Puck was not her cat. "I suppose," Iva said from behind her, "that means you are not bringing the cat back next year." Hermione smiled thinly. Iva had been holding a grudge for Puck's monopolization of their dormitory for months. "Yes, he's not going to be coming back. HM. See to it you don't bring in any other creatures without so much as a polite warning next time." There was another stretch of silence. "I will," Hermione said tightly, straightening. "Goodbye, Iva." Iva fastened the final clasp of her trunk and regarded her with her usual unreadable expression. "Yes," she said. "Goodbye." They stood there, simply staring at each other. Hermione shifted awkwardly. "Well, it was a really great experience being your roommate. You're the first roommate I've ever had, and a pretty good one at that." "You are my first as well," said Iva. "There used to be an uneven number of girls in our year. I had a room all to myself until you came." "Oh, that must have been awfully lonely," said Hermione, trying to smile. "HM," said Iva noncommittally, and with that she left, rolling her trunk out behind her. Hermione sighed and followed suit. There was much bedlam in the corridors, and Hermione maneuvered her own trunk through the noisy throng, narrowly avoiding a second year attempting to drag what appeared to be an entire suit of armor towards the exit. As she descended the final staircase, the doors to the great hall stood open, and there, at the high table, sat Master Thalberg. For a moment, the noise dimmed. He looked perfectly at ease. A cup of dark coffee steamed before him, his broad shoulders relaxed as he ate his eggs. Hermione's fingers tightened around the handle of her trunk, but she didn't have time to glare before. "The marks are up. The marks are up." At once, the entrance hall surged with motion. Hermione's head snapped toward the massive notice board beside the oak doors, where a fresh stack of parchment had been affixed. Students were already crowding around it, craning their necks, standing on tiptoes, and elbowing for position. Her stomach lurched. Without another glance at the high table, she dragged her trunk after her and hurried towards the board. "Wait up, Hermione," Emil called, jogging to catch up. Astrid was already there, braids bouncing as she attempted to wedge herself between two broad-shouldered boys. Hermione reached the edge of the crowd and stopped. People were whispering. She could feel it, the sideways glances murmurs that ceased abruptly when she looked in their general direction. Heat crept into her face. Had she failed? Had something gone wrong? Move, please and thank you, Astrid exclaimed, elbowing someone in the ribs. Some people actually have marks they went OC. Together, the three of them pushed forward until the first parchment for rituals was finally in view, and Hermione's eyes flew to the top, only to see herself in first place. As she made her way through the crowd, seeing more and more, her heart climbed steadily with each first. In charms, in natural magic, even in arithmancy, of course, when she reached dueling warfare, it was not necessarily a surprise that Conrad had obtained first place while she'd only gotten second, even if it did sting a bit. She could live with that, and yet the whispering still did not stop for some reason. Nevertheless, Hermione did not look over her shoulder, not wanting to give them the satisfaction. Beside her, Emil made a strangled sound. These can't be mine," he said faintly. Hermione glanced sideways, her eyes bulging when she saw his rankings. Astrid seemed similarly surprised, leaning in. "You did better than me in charms. You." "How? There's something called a library," Ivan Petrov chimed in, beaming at them as if they were all a group of pals, which he had a rather odd habit of doing. "Its doors are always open," he laughed, but Astrid didn't look pleased. "Yeah, and you know what else is always open? Your mother's legs. Maybe crawl back in there to get all the development you sorely missed as a fetus." "Oh, that's a good one," he said, laughing harder. Astrid opened her mouth, probably to insult him further, but that's when he went on, "You really are hilarious, don't you know that?" "Of course I knew that, you idiot," said Astrid, but she beamed at him. "Good on you for recognizing that, though." "I'm proud." She looked at the transfiguration parchment then, her smile widening. "Ha, I beat you, Emil, loser." Congrats," said Emil unsurely. Hermione allowed herself a small, distracted smile before freezing in place at the sight of the history rankings. She was second place. Her eyes flicked upward, only to find that the first spot belonged to none other than Astrid. Hermione stared. "That can't be right," she said faintly. I always rank first in the bi-weekly standings." Astrid gave a bright giggle. "Oh, about that," she said. "Master Iliv is really indulgent with differing interpretations on quizzes and essays. Very broad-minded. But on the final, he is such a catty grader. He marks just a bit lower than you expect." Hermione turned slowly. "You knew?" she asked very carefully. "To be fair, I would have told you if I liked you more. But you don't even rank in my top 5 friends, sir. Wait, does Lars count as a friend since he's my boyfriend? Anyway, get over it. All's fair in war, right?" Hermione made an outraged noise. Still muttering, she dragged her gaze downward to the overall runic ranking, the final column, listed alphabetically, where each student assigned a carved rune denoting distinction. Her eyes skimmed from the top until they reached Conrad von Eisenwald. And there it was, letter 16CF. Tiwaz. At the sight of it, Hermione's breath left her in a rush. Tiwaz was awarded only to the very top of the class. "Oh God," she whispered, her vision blurring. "I can't. Roman 2 didn't make the top. How?" I got top in practically all of the individual classes, bar 2, I don't know we." Abruptly, she squeezed her eyes shut. "Emil, please, you look. I can't take it." There was a pause, and she heard him swallow. "Well, what I get?" "Please say this is the first recorded shared to was in Durmstrang history. Ordera, please. Don't say expelled, and I must exit the premises immediately." "Well, you didn't get Iwaz," said Emil, though his voice shook. "And it's the last day, so you'll have to leave anyway, really." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Emil said weakly, "you got a Thala." Hermione's eyes flew open, and she scanned the runic rankings once more, only to find that next to her name Hermione Morgenstern was carved, letter 16DF, Athala. It was awarded when performance surpassed even standard first distinction in at least one subject, and was deemed unusually exceptional. Gellert Grindelwald himself had been said to get Athalas a second year, with notes from at least 4 teachers. Of course, Hermione too had a notation beside hers as well, awarded by Master Capel. Hermione stared at it for a long moment, surprised it hadn't been from Mistress Marle instead, before letting out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a gasp. "Athala," Astrid squealed. "Hermione." "Ah, this is why I love that you're my best friend in the entire world. This is really big for us. With talent like that, you can drag us out of the slums." "Wasn't I not even in the top 5 a second ago?" asked Hermione, still blinking at the parchment. "And slums," Emil repeated, one dark eyebrow climbing towards his hairline. "Astrid, your mother is nearly wealthy enough to purchase the Swedish minister as a decorative footstool." Astrid sniffed with great dignity. "First of all, rankings are fluid. Secondly, even if my mother were that rich, which she isn't, but ought to be almost, is never enough. Have some ambition, Emil." Emil drew breath, clearly prepared to deliver a reply, but before he could do so a bell tolled from deep within the castle. The sound was long and sonorous, reverberating through the entrance hall and sending students scattering like a flock of startled starlings. That, given by Mistress Varick's sudden opening of the great double doors, marked their departure, it seemed. What followed could scarcely be called a departure. It was closer to a siege in reverse. Trunks thundered down staircases, colliding with corners and unfortunate ankles alike. Owls shrieked from their cages in outraged protest. The corridors, usually austere, echoing places, rang instead with laughter, shouted farewells, and frantic accusations about misplaced gloves. Hermione found herself swept along in the current, the single word on the parchment Athala burning at the forefront of her thoughts like a brand. Out across the cliffs they poured in a great procession, the grey sea on the other side crashing against the rocks far below. The wind seized at cloaks and hair as though reluctant to surrender its students to the wider world. "Hermione," she turned. Conrad stood a little apart from the others, hands clasped behind his back in that permanently rigid posture of his. "Yes," she said warily. He hesitated, an event so rare it warranted noticing before stepping closer. "I have been considering," he began, each syllable arranged with care, "that it would be nice for us to be friends next year, or if not friends, friendly acquaintances." Hermione stared at him. "Nice, you are competent," he said, as though presenting evidence. "I am competent. It would be wasteful, no. Conrad, I don't think that's how friends work," she said faintly. "It's no-de mean you can't just." Without further preamble, he reached into his satchel and withdrew a book. It was bound in dark leather, its edges silvered, and its title embossed in sharp cursive. Hermione's breath caught. A primer on the subtle governance of the mind. She looked at the book, then at him, and back again. "You cannot be serious." "I rarely indulge in other states," he replied dryly, pressing it into her hands. "You were researching the mind arts in the library for quite a while, so I hoped this would be adequate." "Is it not? Well, of course it's thoughtful, and I am grateful, believe me, but this isn't the sort of thing one gives away on a whim." "Why?" he shrugged, though the movement held a curious stiffness. "I'm very friendly." Hermione narrowed her eyes. "And what do you expect in return?" "In return?" He looked genuinely perplexed. "Yes, in return. People don't just give away grimoires of this caliber on a whim, now do they?" The blonde boy studied her for a moment before replying flatly, "How else am I to make friends?" "By hurling Eisenkellers at them, or perhaps you expect me to just win others over with my winning smile." Despite herself, Hermione felt her lips twitch. "I had not taken you for a comedian." "Nor had I." "You're still avoiding the question." Conrad exhaled through his nose. "If you were from an old family, you would understand that certain implications are not meant to be spoken aloud. Am I expected to say that, yes, I gave this to you because I wish to use you in the future?" "Well, that's a great answer," said Hermione, beaming. "I prefer clarity." To her astonishment, he laughed, a short, sharp sound, but unmistakably a laugh. "Yes," he said, "so I have observed." And then, as abruptly as he had appeared, he stepped back. "Next year, Hermione." Next year, she echoed, shoving the book into her satchel. By the time she reached the grid of portkeys laid out along the cliffs, edged simple metal discs engraved with names Astrid and Emil were already there. Or rather, Astrid and Lars were engaged in what could only be described as an alarmingly enthusiastic farewell. The accompanying sounds were enough to make even Hermione almost gag. Emil stood next to the scene, looking a little green. Astrid and Lars eventually detached themselves with a noise that defied polite description. Lars smirked, and Astrid looked as though she might explode from joy. "I'll miss you," she breathed. "I am missing you already," he replied smoothly. Astrid emitted a squeal of such pitch that several bystanders flinched. "I've been missing you since yesterday. I miss who I was before witnessing this," Emil muttered darkly. Hermione stifled a laugh. Emil looked pleased. Astrid clung to Lars's arm. "You better take the rainbow at least twice a week." Hermione's eyebrows shot upward. Leaning towards Emil, she whispered, "Is that a—" He choked back a laugh. "No, Scandinavians use enchanted mirrors-looking glasses to travel. It's called taking the rainbow. Oh, though," he added loftily, "the Sarklen remains vastly superior." "Of course it is." Meanwhile, Astrid had draped herself so thoroughly over Lars that he appeared to be wearing her as an accessory. "It's such a shame I won't be around you all summer," she purred. "But next year I can keep you warm all through the winter, real warm." Once again, Hermione's bushy eyebrows rose. "Isthata, definitely," Emil said firmly. They both dissolved into laughter, giggling until Varric gave the final call for students to find their portkeys. Students began stepping forward to claim their discs, each bracing for the unpleasant wrench that would follow. Hermione exchanged brisk farewells with Lars, and Astrid squeezing her fiercely before darting back for one final, dramatic embrace, then turned to Emil. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hermione stepped forward and hugged him with sudden ferocity. He stiffened in surprise, and then his arms closed around her just as tightly. "Right," she said into his shoulder. "I don't care how far we are. The Diagon Alley Owls could make the trip to Durmstrang, so I expect yours to perform similarly, even if the logistics don't quite make sense." "Obviously," he replied. "Have a great holiday." "You too." She pulled away first, blinking rapidly, before turning and walking in the direction of her disc. Eventually, after many moments of wandering, she saw hers and began walking in that direction. Coincidentally, her portkey lay only a short distance from Astrid's, and so the two girls came across each other once more. As they walked, suddenly, Astrid cast her a bright smile. "At least there is one advantage to Britain humiliating itself on the world stage and Hogwarts closing." Hermione frowned. "And that would be, is it not obvious?" Upon reaching their respective discs, Astrid turned to her, looking puzzled and cheery at once. "If Hogwarts doesn't reopen by next autumn, plenty of British wizards will flock to Durmstrang, surely," Astrid chirped. "Yes, some of them might be dreadful blood purists, but there are bound to be a few decent ones. You might even know some already." She flashed a dazzling smile and stepped onto her disc, while Hermione stumbled onto her own. The portkey activated, and the cliffs, the sea, and the wind were torn away in a violent whirl of color and air. But it wasn't the familiar sensation of a hook yanking at her navel that made Hermione's stomach churn.